The Third Temple Imperative, when theology becomes architecture. The construction of a third temple on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, on the site currently occupied by the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, is not a fringe idea. It sits at the theological core of the dispensationalist end-times architecture that runs through this entire investigation. Within Christian Zionist eschatology, the rebuilding of the temple is not optional. It is a prerequisite. The sequence is explicit in the theology. The temple must be rebuilt. The Antichrist will defile it. The abomination of desolation, referenced in Daniel 9:27, Matthew 24:15, and 2 Thessalonians 2:4, this triggers the Great Tribulation, which precedes the Battle of Armageddon, which precedes the second coming of Christ. For millions of dispensationalist evangelicals, supporting the conditions that make the temple possible is therefore an act of prophetic faithfulness, not political preference. The genealogy of the Antichrist figure central to this sequence, as the ultimate desecrator of the rebuilt temple, has been rigorously traced by theologian Bernard McGinn across 2,000 years of Christian eschatological imagination, reminding us that what presents itself as timeless biblical truth is in fact a historically constructed interpretive framework, one now being operationalized as foreign policy. The Iran connection. The Temple Mount is currently administered under Jordanian Waqf Authority. The Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock stand on the site. Any construction of a third temple requires their removal or destruction. Iran is the primary military and ideological guarantor of resistance to Israeli sovereignty over the Temple Mount through its support of Hamas, Hezbollah, and the broader axis of resistance. The theological logic therefore runs as follows. Eliminating Iranian power removes the principal military shield protecting the Islamic holy sites, thereby bringing the conditions for temple construction measurably closer. Whether or not this calculation is consciously articulated by policymakers, it operates as a structural alignment between the war on Iran and the Third Temple project. In March 2026, commentator Tucker Carlson stated publicly that key players involved in this war believe that what we're seeing will usher in events that begin with the destruction of the Dome of the Rock and the rebuilding of the Third Temple. More disturbingly, Carlson openly raised the scenario of a staged destruction of the Al-Aqsa complex attributed to Iran, a possibility he summarized with the words, "Oops, the Iranians did it." Whatever its sourcing, the public utterance of this scenario by a mainstream figure with a mass audience is itself a political event that demands documentation. Documented institutional presence. This is not purely theological speculation, nor is it a phenomenon born of the current crisis. As early as 2000, journalist and historian Gershom Gorenberg documented in The End of Days the convergence between American dispensationalist eschatology, the Jewish temple rebuilding movement, and the geopolitical explosive that the Temple Mount represented, long before it became a live strategic emergency. What Gorenberg identified as a latent collision is now an active one. The Temple Institute in Jerusalem has been preparing ritual objects, priestly garments, and architectural plans for the Third Temple for decades. Jewish visits to the Temple Mount have reached historic numbers. Several figures close to the current U.S. administration, including Speaker Mike Johnson, have spoken publicly about Israel's prophetic destiny. Members of Netanyahu's coalition, particularly Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, have made statements signaling movement toward asserting Israeli sovereignty over the site. It should be noted that the desire to rebuild the temple is not universal within Judaism. Jewish religious life reorganized itself around prayer, Torah study, and synagogue practice after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE and has functioned without a physical temple for nearly 2,000 years. The temple rebuilding movement represents a specific theological current, not a consensus. The Islamic dimension. For the Muslim world, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is the third holiest site in Islam. Any threat to it, real or perceived, carries a mobilizing power that transcends national, ethnic, and sectarian boundaries. Iran has consistently positioned itself as the defender of Al-Aqsa, which partly explains the extraordinary resonance of its rhetoric across Sunni and Shia populations alike. Historian Usama Makdisi has documented that interconfessional coexistence was historically the norm in the Levant, which makes the destruction wrought by imported eschatological agendas all the more historically aberrant. That the threat to Al-Aqsa now resonates beyond Shia-Sunni divides was starkly illustrated in November 2023, when Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan declared at an emergency summit of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, Al-Aqsa is not only a Palestinian cause, it is the cause of all Muslims, of all humanity. This means the Third Temple dimension is not merely a theological footnote. It is one of the deepest fault lines in the entire confrontation, and one that is almost entirely absent from Western mainstream coverage of the Iran conflict. Persia in Prophesy. Political rhetoric surrounding Iran often adopts moral language that echoes religious frameworks. U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham, for one, has described the Iranian government as evil and framed confrontation with Tehran as a struggle between justice and tyranny. Although such language is common in political discourse, it also resonates strongly with religious narratives portraying conflicts as battles between good and evil. What's more is that apocalyptic interpretations frequently reference passages from the Book of Ezekiel. These passages describe a coalition of nations led by Gog attacking Israel in the final days. In modern evangelical interpretation, the ancient name Persia mentioned in the text is often associated with modern Iran. And while many biblical scholars reject direct geopolitical applications of these texts, such interpretations remain influential in certain religious media networks. Most probably when he wrote his book, which quickly became a global success, Reza Aslan could not have imagined that it would probably be his native country, Iran, and not the Islamic fundamentalism of the likes of al-Qaeda and Daesh, that could be the spark that would ignite the Middle East as part of a cosmic war initiated by Washington and Tel Aviv. His book is an in-depth study of the ideology fueling militants throughout the Muslim world and an exploration of religious violence in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The hijackers who attacked the United States on September 11, 2001, he wrote, thought they were fighting a cosmic war. He maintained that by infusing the war on terror with the same kind of religiously polarizing rhetoric, the United States is also fighting a cosmic war, a war that can't be won. Aslan argues that we must strip conflicts of their religious connotations and address the earthly grievances that always lie behind the cosmic impulse. The truth, he added, is that the 9/11 attacks were an invitation to a war that was already underway, a cosmic war that, in the mind of the jihadist, has been raging between the forces of good and evil since time immemorial. It was an invitation that a great many Americans were more than willing to accept. How do you win a cosmic war? By refusing to fight in one, Aslan concluded. In support of this argument, he cites the remarks of Lieutenant General William G. Boykin, former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, who had been tasked with tracking down Osama bin Laden. Addressing a congregation at the Good Shepherd Community Church in Sandy, Oregon, in June 2003, Boykin asked, "But who is our enemy? It is not Osama bin Laden. Our enemy is a spiritual enemy, because we are a nation of believers. And the enemy that has come against our nation is a spiritual enemy. His name is Satan. And if you don't believe that Satan is real, you are ignoring the very Bible that tells you about God. I am a warrior. One day I will take off this uniform, but I will always be a warrior. And what I am here to do today is to recruit you to be warriors for the kingdom of God." Aslan could equally have drawn on the story revealed in 2007 by the University of Lausanne review, Allez Savoir. Indeed, in 2003, Thomas Romer, professor of theology at the University of Lausanne, received a phone call from the Élysée Palace. President Jacques Chirac's advisors wanted to know more about Gog and Magog, two mysterious names that had been invoked by George W. Bush as he sought to persuade France to join the war in Iraq. In the weeks preceding the intervention in Iraq, Bush reportedly told his skeptical French counterpart that Gog and Magog were at work in the Middle East and that biblical prophecies were being fulfilled. After leaving the Élysée, Chirac himself confirmed the episode to journalist Jean-Claude Maurice, recounting that Bush had appealed to their shared Christian faith and declared that this confrontation was part of a divinely ordained mission, an account Chirac described with barely concealed disbelief. Concluding reflections. When wars are believed to be divinely mandated, diplomacy becomes appeasement and compromise becomes betrayal. Yet the great religious traditions themselves contain warnings against turning faith into a weapon. As the Quran reminds humanity, O mankind, we created you from a male and a female and made you peoples and tribes so that you may know one another. Quran 49:13. The verse reminds us that diversity among civilizations was meant to encourage understanding, not sacred conflict. Moments of rupture with this logic do exist in the record. In June 2009, at Cairo University, President Barack Obama addressed the Muslim world with the words, "I have come here to seek a new beginning between the United States and Muslims around the world." The speech was imperfect, and the policies that followed fell far short of its promise. Yet it demonstrated that U.S. engagement with the Muslim world need not be filtered through apocalyptic eschatology. The abandonment of that rhetorical framework and its replacement by the theological warfare discourse documented in this paper is itself a political choice, not an inevitability. The real danger is not that prophecies exist. The danger arises when political power begins to believe it has a duty to fulfill them. As we wrote in an article in 2017, whose conclusion we reiterate forcefully today, it must be recognized that the rhetoric on the clash of civilizations, constantly and tirelessly repeated by some since the end of the Cold War and the subsequent disappearance of the indispensable enemy, seems to have achieved the objective assigned to it, chiefly by those who benefit from and pull the strings of the perpetuation of conflicts all over the world. This rhetoric has thus produced a dangerous clash of fundamentalisms, which is updating the notions of revenge of God, crusades, and jihad, and adding new ones such as Islamofascism. The consequence of this dramatic turn of events is illustrated on the sought and obtained ground of confrontation by a clash of barbarities. In today's increasing international turmoil, nobody should be blind to the fact that the biggest danger associated with this change is that since the end of World War II, the world has entered the age of the supreme weapon, the atomic bomb, and other weapons of mass destruction, and that extremists on all sides are promising and fervently promoting a cosmic war for the triumph of good over evil. For some of them, it is a religious war, the ultimate war prior to the apocalypse or the end times, whose theater of operations one party sets in Armageddon and the other in Dabiq, both places being situated in the Levant, comprising Syria, which is today being put to fire and sword. Isn't it insane to believe that our civilized world is unable to find a path other than the one leading toward mutually agreed destruction? Add.